Hey everybody, welcome to part 3 in my screaming tutorial series. We're going to be talking about false chords. Now there's a lot of misinformation about false chords on the internet, so be very careful when you read about it online. Some people know exactly what they are, which is mostly fat instead of muscle. They surround your true chords. So the vocal cords you're using to talk right now are actually in between your false chords, which kind of surround them. So if you were to displace the air used for breathing around them, it would create a rattling vibration around your true chords without using them. So that sounds kind of gross when used without anything other than just the sound of them. But it's important to remember that while your true chords are very thin, your false chords are huge and they surround your true chords. So be very careful to make sure that they're all coming out of the right place, because it's a big sound, it's a loud sound. Sometimes people call them growls, but not always, because that can also be used to refer to a kind of true chord screaming that I'll get to in part 4. What are the pros and cons here when it comes to false chord? Ordinarily, I'd show you how to get there first, but with false chord, you really need to consider what you're going to use it for. So right up front, false chord is loud, it is primal, in like an animalistic sense. It is aggressive. It's almost endlessly blendable. So you can really go into false chord from pretty much any other technique. So you can go from true singing into false chord quite easily and then back if you know what you're doing. You can also go from fry into false if you can't sustain a fry. So that's really helpful for if you ever lose fry and you need to switch to another technique. Last second, like heat of the moment. It's an easy thing to switch into instantly once you get down the usage of it. It's also easily influenced by mouth shape. So once you find the proper area and the proper amount of air to use, you can get most of the sound by just manipulating your lips, teeth, tongue. A lot of good stuff. If you can't hear yourself and you're doing false chord, you'll be able to feel yourself more easily than if you're doing fry or just singing, and know that you're doing it right. You don't have to worry about the monitors being on because you can feel that you're doing it right. It's the easiest one to feel being done correctly, and the easiest one to feel being done incorrectly. So it's got like a barrier to entry that's really low. It's basically screaming for dummies, but it's also a very versatile technique. And if you can use it, then you'll be golden. So what are some cons? Length, for one. Really hard to hold out a false chord note anywhere near as long as you would hold out a fry note, because with fry, you're using such a little amount of air. You can go endlessly. But with false chord, you're pushing so much air through those false chords that it might not be able to last much longer than you can hold out a yell, you know? So you got to be real careful with how long you plan to hold out a note. If you find that it's going to take more than 10 seconds, it might be a good idea, especially at first, to switch to fry or just do short bursts like like that kind of thing. So really write with it in mind or consider it before you go into a section, whether it's the right technique for you. Because it requires tons of air, it's also really hard to use for any period of time if you're not accustomed to doing any breathing exercises or doing false chord at all. Because it's so loud, you got to be careful not to abuse your true chords while using your false chords. And don't worry, I'll show you how to do that. It also cannot be done at a low volume. This is me attempting false chord at a low volume. It just really doesn't work. There you go. That's like the bare minimum for false chord. The last one is range. Because they're not real vocal cords in the sense that we're used to, that have really tight control over pitch, you have to consider that there's really not as much of a range for false chord. So it can be difficult to get the really highs and the really lows without understanding a couple of tricks to getting there. And especially without a lot of practice, it can be incredibly difficult to achieve. So let's say that you've gone through all the pros and cons and decided that you really, really are interested in doing false chord. Well, now that you're informed on what the dangers may be, as well as the pros and cons, we can get to one, this friendly reminder to, as always, stay hydrated and practice until you don't feel comfortable anymore. Once you stop feeling comfortable with false cord, you gotta stop, because pushing it too much can cause vocal nodules, can cause tearing or damage in your throat, and you really don't want to push it because this one is the big one. So be very careful. So how do you find your false cord? Well, it's been there the whole time. You just don't know how to use it. First off, you can use what I like to call the mezzo crack sledgehammer attack. So just like finding your fry, going to your mezzo with the swing, like, and going up or down depending on where you're at, and trying to find that bridge between where there's the little bit of that crack at a louder volume, has almost like a distortion all its own. And that's because that cracking area is where you can find the false chords. So that cracking with enough air supplied with a loud sigh, like a, not a, but like a, really open, you'll find that right where the, giving more air to the mezzo and breathing out in a loud sigh will help you find it. That's also what I like to call the voice crack sigh. So when you're doing the crack sledgehammer attack, specifically, you go until you find the place where there's nothing in the throat, but only over the mouth. So like in the nasal passages, or you can do the voice crack sigh where you find the voice crack first. And then push through it with a sigh. Another common one for people who really like DMX, not the protocol, but the rapper, is you just bark or go woof until you find it. For example, hear how I started really low, but gradually went higher until I found a place where there was breakup. So not that's where the false chords are vibrating. Really important to keep in mind that if you go too low, it'll have a really round sound, but it won't have any distortion. All of the distortion comes from the above the throat, where the sinuses and the false chords and all that stuff vibrate with a really aggressive distortion. Is kind of the same as but pushing harder through the nose. So if you find that you found it, but you can't keep it out of your throat, imagine pushing it through your nose, right? One of the things that you can do to guarantee that you're doing it right is to visualize your entire face and the stuff behind it. So if you've got it in your cheekbones or your nose or coming out your forehead, then it feels right. If it's going out below that, you may end up gagging yourself, but also you won't really be able to achieve the same level of distortion as easily as I've shown. So you can't just go in one easy step. It's going to take time to develop the clarity and the control over those muscles. For people that have been doing it for a long time, they can go from I'm singing now, Joe, false chord, and back, yeah, right into the fry, and then the fry to the false chord. So you can do all of these styles one after the other, so long as you're keeping it all above the areas of your face where the throat isn't going to be touched. Now, obviously, your throat is just a wind tunnel, so you're going to have to push all the air through your throat, but you're not going to want to tighten the throat. During all of those parts, my throat was incredibly relaxed, and it's important to know that if you're doing it right, you'll feel that resonance above your cheekbones. If you have to, put your finger in the middle of your mouth, bite down, and make sure that all of the sound is coming from above your finger and not below the finger. So if you're talking down here, you'll think, oh yeah, that's below the finger. But if you're talking out here, you'll suddenly realize that all of the tension is relieved from your throat and it goes up into your sinuses and your cheekbones and you feel like you can look up and it's fine, that's the area you really want to be feeling all of it. If it's up here, you're probably fine. So, needless to say, you won't feel any pain if you're doing it right. But you may feel a little bit of soreness as you're developing the muscles because these aren't muscles that you're ever using. Unlike fry, which, sometimes people talk in fry. It's totally cool, man. Like, you can't really talk with your false chords because it would just sound weird all the time. And nobody wants to deal with that. You won't feel any pain, but, you do have to build those muscles before you can get them consistent. You'll get some really animalistic sounding distortions. I'm talking like... disgusting sounds, You'll be able to push a lot of air very consistently. Just practicing false chord can really help to expand your lung capacity and help you in all other styles as well, so long as you're not hurting your voice. You're really getting a good workout diaphragmatically and in your lungs. So that's good. One really other important thing to know when you're doing it right is, unlike fry, false chord's a threshold and not a target. So unlike fry, where you have to be perfectly between too much air and over not enough air, with false chord, there is only a threshold. There's really no ceiling for air usage. There's only a threshold. So you can imagine the threshold right here, and then right here is the amount of air I'm using. I'm getting closer to that threshold. The distortion doesn't start till you hit the threshold, but that threshold's going to be a decent amount of air. So you got to keep it over the threshold to have the distortion going, and anything in between when you gather air can go below that threshold, but it's not going to have the distortion. So it's really important to memorize the fact that you can push a ton of air, maintain anything over this level. So if you're right over it, you can get a good maintenance level, like a good sustain level of air without going all the way up. So you might find that it helps to push through, go all the way up, and then reduce the air until right over you get to the point. So a good example would be... This time I'm only using a middle amount of air. But that was just the bare necessary amount for me to keep it going. And as a result, I was able to sustain it for longer and have a lot more control over where I went. So keep that in mind. If it were to dip below that amount of air, you'd have to come back into it by pushing over it again. In the beginning, it may help to try and do one long sustained note and then break it up. So a good practice would be... just to see how much you need to get it going and really ramp into it and then ramp out of it so that you have an idea of airflow consistently. Now, this is one of the easier techniques to start, one of the harder ones to get mastered. And here's why. That cool range stuff that you can do should not affect your throat in any way. It should only affect your mouth. So even if you really want something stupid high, you're just going to have to open your mouth wider without affecting the tightness of your throat. So you're just going to have to open your mouth really wide while keeping your face perfectly forward without raising it at all, so you don't tighten your vocal cords, because then your vocal cords might be affected by it. You really got to consider what you're doing with your body when you do false chord stuff. I find that typically when I do false chord, I have a tendency to lean into it. And that's okay because you're relaxing as you go down. You can usually get a nice, raw, relaxed sound. This is the So when you're doing a false chord scream, your tongue matters a lot, so much. If you were to take your tongue and you would have a totally different resonance. You get this sound out of it. If you keep your tongue pulled back, like so, with your tongue pressing against the top of your mouth. Back out. You really create your own vowel sounds with the tongue. So shoving your tongue, for example, into the bottom left corner of your mouth, right into your cheek, and then creating the smallest possible O with your mouth, with your lips. You can really hear how the resonance changes. So if you're trying to find a good resonance to use in false chord, just move your tongue around a lot and see where you like it. For example, you might find that you prefer more of a Phil Bozeman sound by creating kind of like a off-centered mouthpiece kind of thing, like I never felt the way to be. Versus a more direct, straight-on, mid-rangey, barky vibe with your mouth coming at the same way you would talk. My mouth open in the same way that I talk. If you were to do it that way, you would create a more open mid-rangey sound. Highs are generally achieved by backing off a little bit on the air and then opening the mouth really wide. So false low mid, false high, false high. All with the mouth, nothing in the throat, just in the mouth. Now you'll find that range might be difficult for you to achieve, and that's fine. Work your way into it. Don't try to push anything. Just go for it. Most people don't expect much from screamers when it comes to going high, and usually those screamers will default to going to fry for their highest parts anyway, just because it's so much easier to go really high. Experiment. Make sure that once you're done practicing, you hydrate again. Stay hydrated before practice, stay hydrated during, and don't go too hard on it, because even though this technique is really easy to go hard with, you really don't want to make your throat sore. It's okay to ease yourself into it gradually, because especially with this, it takes a lot of effort. You might find yourself getting lightheaded or winded over time. That's okay. Just go back to part 1, do some of those breathing exercises, make sure that it's really working for you the way you're supposed to do it, and that it's not going into the throat at all, and you'll be perfectly fine. So anyway, what are some good examples of false chord now that all that stuff's out of the way? For one thing, Corey Taylor, not in the beginning. In the beginning, he was doing true chord. And then he did the forbidden scream. And then during the All Hope Is Gone era, he did fry. And then after the gray chapters for We Are Not Your Kind and The End So Far, he did false chord. And you can really tell because when he's in studio, he can stand far away from the mic and he's got enough volume to be like, this is not okay, like that kind of thing. And it sounds brutal and it's really, really strong. Some other examples are Winston McCall from Parkway Drive, Matty Mullins from Memphis Mayfire. He does really, really loud lows, and he doesn't really hold things out for very long, but you can tell that he's able to be like, this is enough. He may not do like a really soft, like really tight O, but he's up and down here with his mouth a little closed. Chris Motionless doesn't really know what kind of screams he does, but you can definitely tell that he often will switch to false chords, especially for some passages that don't require long held out notes. Again, it's a common enough thing. Some people just do it intuitively. Andrew Vanderzalm from Feed Her to the Sharks almost definitely does false chord. Phil Labonte from All That Remains absolutely does false chord. And Alex Terrible is a pretty good example of a guy who does false chord. So there's plenty of artists who have a very distinctive and unique voice that use false chord. So don't be ashamed if the sound you're going for is a little bit more like other people, like with Fry. With false chord, you're gonna sound just like an extremely exaggerated version of you, pushed to an animalistic degree, unlike with Fry, where most people sound pretty similar when they talk like this. So really, you just gotta feel it, Got to be okay with how you sound. And if you prefer one of the other styles, just do that one instead. That's all I've got for today. So if you have any questions, feel free to send me a message. If you don't, thank you very much for listening. And next time we'll get into true chord. I'm Phil from One Wall Studios signing out. Take care.